Hi, everyone. I'm Gretchen Bailey. I'm with Optometry Times. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Noel Brennan, Research Fellow at Johnson & Johnson Vision. Noel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Hi, Gretchen. Well, thank you for speaking with me.
Well, we're going to talk a bit about myopia, myopia control, myopia management. But before we do that, I wanted to ask you about your title, which is Research Fellow. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Sure. So Research Fellow is essentially somebody who follows the academic path or the technical path as opposed to the managerial path. So my talented colleague, Jacqueline Hernandez, is now leading the platform, which essentially is the D part, the development part of R&D, and I'm doing the R part, so concentrating on the science of myopia control.
Excellent. So you get to play in the lab and sit there and figure it all out and think about how we're going to solve this problem that's facing the world.
Yes, I don't spend too much time in the lab. Mostly what I do is spend a lot of time on my computer. My research is largely in silico rather than in vitro or in vivo.
Got it. So let's talk a bit about myopia control versus myopia management. That some people are calling it myopia management, some are myopia control, and management seems to be a slightly newer term. Is there a difference in your thinking, and does it matter?
So I think myopia management is a term that's kind of been brought up to be all-encompassing. So it includes the situation where you might only correct myopia, for example, or even if you're treating maybe binocular vision problems, things like that. And perhaps some companies are choosing to use that term because it avoids getting complex with off-label indications for products.
Yes.
To me, myopia control is truly when we set about reducing myopia progression in an existing myope. And that's the term that I use, and to be honest, it's my preferred term.
That's interesting because I'm hearing less and less myopia control and more myopia management. So I'm glad that I asked that.
But as well, I guess the myopia management is intended to be a very broad part of what's being done. So perhaps more holistic, whereas myopia control is specifically about let's slow down the progression rate.
Got it. So I know that J&J is doing a lot with myopia control, and you are behind a lot of that. Can we talk a little bit about where the company is and what you're looking to do?
Sure. So Johnson & Johnson Vision wants to bring a healthy lifestyle to all people that within its reach. And so really our myopia platform is directed at this very thing. We are looking at numerous opportunities. We're conducting clinical trials. We've conducted clinical trials in the past. There'll be more in the future. And we're generally looking to create a fairly broad portfolio of products going forward. The company is investing heavily in basic research. We certainly want to lead with the science, and to that extent, we have this partnership with Singapore Eye Research Institute that has been running for over a year now. That's a $26 million plus partnership that we have there, and it's looking at a range of different things, but a lot of it is basic research, trying to work out the mechanisms behind myopia, trying to come up with predictive analytics, looking at the disease state and what we can do with that, as well as looking at new product opportunities.
Are you looking beyond contact lenses, or is that the focus of where you're thinking we are for corrective opportunities?
So the thing that we say, and we will continue to say, is we're looking at anything that will work.
That's a very good answer in many ways. One, of course, obviously, nobody wants to share what's going on before you're ready to share it. But on the other hand, too, something's got to work. And if it's a combination of a contact lens or a spectacle lens at some point, or atropine, or what can we do? Whatever will work, I think, is where we need to go, because there are so many people who are seeing the myopia progress, and in different areas of the world, it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, and something's got to be done.
Well, that's right, and part of what we also do is try and get an estimate of what is going to happen to people as time goes on. So we've done a lot of work looking at the disease state, and the picture that we see is pretty dire. And one of the huge issues there is the public is, and to many practitioners in some cases, as well as governments, etc., are so unaware of the negative effects going forward that we're going to have with myopia. Because one of the things we say at Johnson & Johnson is that this is the biggest eye health threat of the 21st century, and we really mean that, because the escalation in the amount of disease we see coming forward over the next few decades, it's going to be quite problematic. And that's putting it mildly for particularly Southeast Asian countries.
So I know that there are some risk factors to kids developing higher amounts of myopia. So there's the genetic factor, there's the outdoors factor, there's a lifestyle factor. Do we have any solid data yet on the effect of digital device usage, whether that's because you are having a lack of accommodation by looking at something for a long period of time, or by virtue of the fact that you are looking at a screen, you're not outside, either looking at a farther away focal point or getting some vitamin D? Do we have any data on that?
So there's no clear data that links digital devices and uses of digital devices to increased myopia progression or even myopia onset. And there's a couple of reasons not to believe that there is a relationship. For example, the myopia problem has been around since at least the 1980s. We didn't have handheld digital devices or smartphones back then. If anything, you might link it more to desktop computers. Not that we have strong data in that regard either. The other thing is, there's a theory about peripheral hyperopia being a driver of myopia development. And if you think about looking at a handheld digital device here, this is not peripheral hyperopia. If you're focusing here, this is peripheral myopia. So you might even think perhaps a small area in which one is looking up close might be even protective rather than myopogenic per se. The clear thing is there's no straightforward data. But what we do know is that spending more time out of doors is protective. And one issue about this lifestyle that we live now, if children are going to spend a lot more time on digital devices, they are going to spend a lot less time out of doors. So it may not be a direct relationship, it may be an indirect relationship. And, I think everybody just agrees the less time kids spend on digital devices, the more time they spend out of doors, the healthier as a person they are going to be.
Which is a bit difficult given where we sit now in a global pandemic, with kids spending just about the same amount of time on their devices as people like you and me, given that they might be doing school online. So that's a challenge. Do you think that with this pandemic, if we fast forward a year or two, that we might see an increase in myopia due to the fact that kids are not going out for recess, they're inside doing this school online, and they seem to be more structured in front of a screen at home than they might be in a school setting.
Well, they might be more structured on a screen at home than in a school setting. They might not as well. Depends how
That's true.
good the adherence is, and how, you know, perhaps how involved the parents are with work and have enough time to make sure that they are well structured looking at devices. You would have to say there's a high likelihood that children will be spending less time out of doors. That may not be the case, but if that is the case, then you almost certainly link it to a greater amount of myopia going forward. I know our colleague, Dr. Thomas Eller, has kind of said, well, maybe we're not seeing such a big increase from his experience in practice, and I'm not sure why that might be. But certainly it's a concern. You know, everything you say makes one think, yeah, there's potentially a problem here.
Let's switch gears for a minute and talk about axial length. That I know that's important in taking a look at progression of myopia, but for most practitioners, if not all practitioners in a clinical setting, unless you're in at a research center, you're not really going to have access to measuring axial length. Is that going to be a challenge for practitioners who want to track the progression of myopia in their patients?
So it is something of a challenge. Let me say first off, though, very much that we don't think that you must have capability of measuring axial length to undertake myopia control. You really just need to be aware of what the limitations to refractive error measurement are. Ideally, everybody is able to measure axial length and axial elongation, and really with optical biometry as the preferred technique because of its high accuracy. And we think down the track that that's going to become more the standard of care as time goes on. But certainly you shouldn't not do myopia control if you can't measure axial length. The key elements here are that optical biometry on a relative basis is so much more accurate than refractive error measurement. Axial length has been linked more closely to the development of disease than has refractive error. And for example, orthokeratology, your refraction is not going to be great if you've bent the cornea essentially to correct myopia. So axial length is clearly superior under that circumstance. Even with atropine, where we see differences that are unresolved between refractive change and axial elongation is going to be a better way to go there. So, you know, that's the preference. And with refractive error, you just need to be aware that your ability to measure progression over a year or so is around about the same as the variability of the measurement system you're using. So the signal to noise ratio is not wonderful. You can only get a really good idea of refractive progression over a number of years per se. And I think if people are just aware of that when they're doing any myopia control, that they need to be cautious about being too reactive to what they're measuring with refractive error.
Got it. Let's talk a bit about research data, recent research data that I know that J&J has had some recent posters, papers, presentations. Are there, what key points do you think practitioners should know about the research that's coming out of Johnson & Johnson Vision?
So one of the big deals that we see right now is this reporting of myopia control as percentage figures. And this is misleading. We really need to get away from that. So what we find is that you get an absolute decrease across a variety of different factors, whether it be progression rate, age, even ethnicity. So that on average, your fast progressor is getting the same reduction in axial elongation as your slow progressor. It's not working as a percentage. And the percentage is a group mean. It doesn't help you work out what's going to happen with an individual. In addition, myopia control efficacy decreases over time. There's a study from Japan on orthokeratology where there was a 50% reduction in axial elongation in the first year. By the 5th year, it was only 6%. On an average over the 5-year period, it was about 30%. So, talking in percentages is really misleading, and you're going to give false hope potentially to parents about what can be achieved with their children. So as an example, if you have somebody who's 6 years old who's -1 diopter, and you estimate that by the time they're 17 or 18, they might be -7 or -8.
Mm-hmm.
If you say they're going to get a 50% reduction, you're notionally going to bring them back to -4 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what we've observed is really, because of the nature of how we can achieve control, you may only get about a diopter. And so that's a big difference in terms of expectations. And when we look at all the data, nobody's achieved more than about 0.4 millimeters in any study, which is equivalent to around about 1 diopter. So we need to get our expectations firmly under control and not promise too much.
That's an excellent point. So 1 diopter. So if you've got parents sitting in front of you and you're talking with them about the potential progression of their child's myopia, is 1 diopter worth the trouble, the expense? What do you say when a parent asks you that?
And that's a really good point, because the 50% it's kind of like promising maybe 3 or 4 diopters. Now, one of the good things is most kids don't progress on to become so highly myopic, and so in practice, because you don't have a control group as well, you can't tell how well you're doing in terms of reducing myopia progression. And there is a whole lot of things that are kind of stacked in the optometrist's favor that make them look good. Progression is going to slow down over time naturally anyway, for a start. So often you'll get the impression that you actually getting a really good effect, that's kind of, it seems to be reassuring, but it can actually be something like false hope. But this 1 diopter thing, and look, what I'm saying is that's all we're able to show from an evidence base right now. Maybe you're getting more, and some kids, it's not everybody gets exactly 1 diopter. Some kids will get more, some kids will get less. But that's about what we think. The key thing is, though, that in terms of risk of disease later in life, 1 diopter makes a huge difference. So, for example, with myopic macular degeneration, each individual diopter of myopia increase raises the risk of getting myopic macular degeneration by 67% or thereabouts. So you will reduce it by 40% for each 1 diopter you can pull the patient back, and that's very significant, and a very significant public health benefit. And certainly under those circumstances, we also believe that the benefits outweigh the risks.
That makes sense. So if we look ahead, what do you anticipate that we will see in terms of new research, new data? What should we be watching for, say, ARVO time, next year's Academy? What should we keep our eyes out for?
Lots of things, and I'll be vague about some of the answers I give to this.
Of course.
But look, I think as we go forward, we're going to understand more and more about what we can really achieve in terms of efficacy. And Johnson & Johnson is driving a lot of this work in consultation with Dr. Mark Bullimore, who's well known as well. I think also understanding the disease processes and the benefit we will get from reducing myopia progression. That's going to be another increasing thing as well. We're spending a lot of time there. And also, there are some developments that we'll be sharing over the next 12 months or so about our learnings in terms of what we can do with optical treatments to slow myopia progression. And we've been studying this now for a decade or more at Johnson & Johnson. And we've learned some things. We're going to start sharing some of those things about how we can get maximal effect in terms of reducing progression without causing too much decrement in vision and vision performance. So these are some of the things that we're looking forward to sharing over the next 12 months or so, and you'll see some of this material at ARVO.
Excellent. Something to look forward to then.
Yeah.
If you could offer one takeaway to practitioners out there considering getting involved in myopia control, or those who are already there, what would you tell them?
So one of the other things that we have learned is that the risk for young children under the age of 12 of becoming highly myopic later in life is high. So you should recommend treatment for every child under about 12 years of age. That should be the default, not the exception. And you may not treat them all, and you may have a reason for doing that, but that should be the exception rather than the rule. We believe all young myopic children deserve the opportunity to be treated.
Do you see myopia control becoming standard of care?
Yes, absolutely. And you know, when we tick over to that place, I'm not quite sure, but in my mind right now, it should be the default and the standard of care.
Well, good advice and stuff to look forward to for our upcoming meetings at ARVO Academy next year, more to come. So thank you very much for talking with me today, Dr. Brennan, and I'm sure we'll be talking again about this soon.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you, Gretchen.